The Penderwicks, A Summer Tale of Four Sisters, Two Rabbits, and a Very Interesting Boy, by Jeanne Birdsall. Chapter 18. Goodbye for Now. But the next morning, the car was loaded, and the cottage keys slid under the mat, and the only person there to say goodbye was Harry, in a black Harry's Tomatoes shirt. Black, because I'm sorry you're leaving, he said, almost the excitement. And you haven't heard any news about Geoffrey? Said Skye. You mean since he ran away and his mother found him hiding with you? Harry shook his head. I really am going to miss the excitement. Harry told me he left presents on the front porch, said Jane. I'll do that. Harry handed a large paper bag to Mr. Penderwick. Tomatoes. Thanks, Harry. All right, girls, it's time. Pile in. A little longer, Daddy, said Jane. Maybe he'll still come. If he hasn't by now, I don't think he will. I'm sorry, honey, but we need to start on our way. Skye and Jane stuffed Hound into the back with the suitcases and boxes. Then everyone slid into their seats, taking the same spots they'd had arriving 3 weeks earlier. They looked as miserable as it's possible to look without crying. Probably some of them were. I didn't say goodbye to Yaz and Carla, said Batty. They'll be disappointed. You can send them a postcard when we get home, said Rosalind. And Churchy, let's send her one too. Good idea. And Geoffrey? Oh, said Jane. She was definitely one of the criers. If we happen to hear from Geoffrey in a few days, I'll call and make sure I talk with the Churchy, I promise, said Mr. Penderwick. Harry was pulling away in his tomato chuck. Say goodbye to Harry. Goodbye, Harry. Thank you for the tomatoes. The sisters waved out the car window while Hound barked unhappily in the back. Here we go. Mr. Penderwick started the engine and headed down the driveway. 4 heads turned to watch the yellow cottage disappear slowly into the trees. Goodbye, white bedroom, said Skye. Goodbye, secret passage in the closet, said Batty. Goodbye, dearest Geoffrey and Churchy and summer and magic and adventure and all that's wonderful in life, said Jane. Goodbye, Cagney, Fimbriata Rosebush, thought Rosalind. And goodbye, Cagney. She turned around and unfolded the map. A brand new, uneaten one. There was the route home, marked in red. She had done that the night before, but the red line was oddly blurry. Annoyed, Rosalind dashed the tears out of her eyes. At the end of the driveway, we turn right onto Stafford Street, she told herself resolutely. Then we go left on— Whoops, said Mr. Penderwick, stepping on the brakes. He'd left his glasses on the kitchen counter and had to run back for them, which meant that Skye and Jane had the chance to check the tunnel for Geoffrey one last time, and in a flash, they were out of the car and racing off. Rosalind turned around and looked at Batty, very small and woebegone in the back seat. Are you all right? She asked. No. Endings are sad, aren't they? Yes. And way in the back, Hound whimpered in agreement. Rosalind was trying not to whimper herself, for now that it was too late, all of a sudden she knew she'd made a mistake. I'm an idiot, she thought. I'm only 12 years old, well, 12 and a half, and Cagney's much too grown up to be my boyfriend, but he was my friend, and I hid from him the last time he came to see me. And he didn't come to say goodbye today, and if he remembers me at all, he'll remember me as this little jerk who fell into the pond and ruined his date, and I'll never see him again ever for the rest of my life. If only. Hey, Rosalind. There he was at her window, in his Red Sox cap, friendly and cheerful, just the same as always. Rosalind's if-onlys floated away, and she was left with that now familiar hit-by-a-truck feeling. And although it was a nice feeling this time, her heart was beating so quickly and her breath was so queerly shallow that she couldn't say anything but could only open the door and stumble out of the car. Cagney caught and steadied her before she fell down altogether. Still having trouble with your head, he asked. No, yes, I mean, let me see. She pushed aside her hair and let him gravely inspect her bruise while she tried to calm her nerves. Doesn't look like there will be any permanent damage, he said. Unless you had a concussion, that's why you're babbling. I am not babbling. She said it very slowly and precisely. Good. He looked into the car. You've lost most of your family. Daddy's getting his glasses from the cottage, and Skye and Jane are looking for Geoffrey. They'll all be back soon. Now Rosalind noticed that Cagney was holding a pet carrier. Glad for an excuse to avoid his gaze, she bent down and peered in 2 funny bundles of fur, squished side by side. You brought the rabbits, she said. That's why I'm late, said Cagney. First, Carla hid behind the refrigerator, and then Yaz wouldn't let me catch him for the longest time. but I thought Batty might like to see them again before she went home. Rosalind's heart, whose beating had slowed down a bit, now swelled to twice its normal size with gratitude. She called into the car, "Batty, the bunnies are here to say goodbye." "I brought you something, too." Cagney reached behind him and picked up a large pot. "It's a fimbriata rose. I figured you deserved one of your own, after helping me with mine." "Oh, Cagney." Rosalind took the pot and buried her nose in a white bloom. A present. She didn't have a present for him. She should have given him some of those brownies after all. Would she ever understand boys in her whole entire life? And what should she say now? Then, thank heavens, Batty was out of the car and throwing herself the pit carrier, and Rosalind was able to figure out her next lines. "Thank you so much for the fimbriata. I'll take care of it forever. And thank you for bringing Yaz and Carla. Batty desperately wanted to say goodbye to them. Just as I desperately wanted to say goodbye to you." It was on Rosalind's face, but she didn't say it. Well, really, it was Yaz's idea. Cagney took a carrot out of his pocket and let Batty feed it to the rabbits. Over his shoulder, Rosalind could see her father returning, and now she heard Skye and Jane's voices. They were headed back too. "Take courage, Rosie," she thought. "This is your last chance to act mature. And please say goodbye to Kathleen and thank her for me." "Who? What do you mean, who?" "You know, the girl who helped pull me out of the pond." "Oh, Kathleen, that didn't work out. She wasn't easy to talk to, not like you. Hold on to that skill, Rosie, for when you're old enough to care about boys. They'll appreciate it." Suddenly, he was leaning over and planting a light kiss on the top of Rosalind's head. Her eyes fluttered closed, and she thought, finally, something wonderful to tell Anna, until she opened her eyes again and saw that he was kissing Batty before strolling away toward Skye and Jane. Probably to kiss them too. I'll be lucky if he doesn't kiss Daddy and Hound before he's done. Well, at least I'm the only one with a rose bush. "Why do you look so funny?" said Batty. "I don't." "Yes, you do. Like you're gonna laugh and cry at the same time." Rosalind carefully stowed her fimbriata on the floor of the car, where she'd be able to watch over it during the ride to Cameron. "I'm just glad to be going home, that's all." A few minutes later, all the Penderwicks were back in the car, once more waving goodbye. "Goodbye, Cagney," said Mr. Penderwick. "Thanks for the plant talks." "Goodbye, Yaz and Carla," said Batty. "I love you." "Goodbye, Geoffrey, darn it all, where are you? Even Cagney doesn't have a clue," said Skye. "Goodbye, sanity, because not knowing is driving me crazy," said Jane. Rosalind waved and smiled one last time to Cagney. "Farewell," then smoothed out the map. "Stafford Street. Where's Stafford Street?" she muttered, then realized she was holding the silly thing upside down. With much wrestling, she flipped it, and, "Daddy, stop!" Skye shouted from the back seat. "It's Churchy!" And there was Churchy, jogging toward them through the trees. She burst out into the open, waving her arms just as Mr. Penderwick once more stepped hard on the brakes. The whole family was out of the car in an instant, running to meet her. "Churchy! Churchy!" Jane and Batty threw themselves at her, while Skye danced impatiently in circles. "Geoffrey, what's happened to Geoffrey?" Churchy was too winded for anything but huffing and panting until everyone thought they'd explode with not knowing. Finally she managed, "Oh, thank goodness I caught you. Oh, my beautiful girls, I'm going to miss you so." "But Churchy, Geoffrey," said Skye. "I know, dear, just hold on and he'll tell you himself," and Geoffrey. "He cut through the hedge to the cottage in case you hadn't left and sent me this way in case you had. And here he comes. I can hear him shouting." Now they could hear him too, yelling, "Stop!" and "Wait!" and "Please!" And then they could see him. What joy, rounding the curve, his legs moving so fast they were a blur. Like lightning, the four girls were off and running toward him, and a moment later Geoffrey had disappeared under a pile of Penderwicks. When he came up for air, he was laughing and talking as fast as he could. "I'm sorry I'm late, but Mother just made the phone call to the school this morning, and they said yes, and—" "Hold on!" Skye waved her arms in front of his face. "Start again," said Rosalind. He smiled around at them. "Everything's okay now." "Geoffrey!" That was Jane, frantic with curiosity. He paused, and now he was teasing them. At last he said, "I don't ever have to go to Pensy." The cheering was so loud and long that, as Churchy swore later, the errant birds fled and didn't come back until the next spring. When the Penderwicks' throats finally gave out, Geoffrey started over at the beginning. "After we went back to the house yesterday, Dexter wanted me to go to my room, but Mother said she wanted to talk. So we talked, and then she cried, and we talked, and she cried, and that went on forever. Then Dexter went home, and Mother and I talked some more, and you were right, Rosalind. I was finally able to make her understand about Pensy, and that was great. And she even said I never had to go to West Point if I didn't want to. And then we started to talk about Dexter. Jeffy's smile faded a little. She's still marrying him? Said Skye. He nodded. Could be worse, I guess. She could be marrying a serial killer. Or a werewolf, said Jeanne. Or a... Batty couldn't think of anything worse than a werewolf. Anyway, I told Mother if she was going to marry him, I really would prefer to go to that boarding school in Boston, you know, the one I told you about. And this morning she called them, and they'll take me in September as long as it turns out I'm not a complete moron. And Mother promised to drive me to Boston herself, just me and her without Dexter. And wait, I haven't told you the best part. Jeffrey held up his palm for high fives all around. She said I'm allowed to take a music class at the conservatory. Just one class for now, but it's a beginning, right? Oh, yes, they all shouted, and if any Arundel birds had stayed behind after that last outburst, they surely left now. Jane and Batty couldn't stop hopping up and down, and Skye kept tossing both her and Jeffrey's camouflage hats in the air. And Rosalind went so far as to kiss Jeffrey on the cheek, there having been so much kissing already that day. Then Mr. Penderwicks, after getting the good news in a calmer fashion from Churchy, came over and shook Jeffrey's hand, slapped him on the back, and then Churchy started to cry, and then Jane started to cry, and then Batty, and when even Skye started to cry, it really was time to go home. So for the third time, the Penderwicks loaded themselves in the car, but this time with light hearts and consciences, and the glad relief that comes with happy endings. Skye rolled down her window, and Jeffrey leaned in. Churchy stood behind him, her hand affectionately on his shoulder. We're going to miss you, Jeffrey, said Jane. We'll visit him in Boston, said Rosalind. And I'll visit you and Cameron, said Jeffrey. Just remember, if you don't, I'll kill you, said Skye. I'll remember, said Jeffrey. Goodbye, Hound. Stay out of trouble. Hound wagged his tail cheerfully. Just thinking about trouble made him happy. Okay, everybody, let's go, said Mr. Penderwicks. Goodbye, Jeffrey. Congratulations again, and the very best of luck. Goodbye, said everyone. And off they went again, down the long driveway. Well, off they went for about 20 yards anyway, because by then Batty was pleading with her father to stop the car just one last time, that she had something to do. What is it, Batty? Said Rosalind. Something very important. Please stop, Daddy. It won't take long. So Mr. Penderwicks stopped, and Jane let Batty out her side. Everyone hung out their windows to watch Batty run back toward the cottage, calling to Jeffrey. He walked forward to meet her. What's she up to? Said Skye. She's telling him something, said Jane. He looks surprised, said Rosalind. Do you see what she's doing? Said Jane. I can't believe this. She's taking off her wings and giving them to Jeffrey, said Skye. He's putting them on, said Jane. My wise little Batty, said Mr. Penderwicks. Maxima debuta pour la reverentia. With that, there was nothing left to say. They all sat in silence while Batty trotted back, climbed in over Jane, and sat on her seat. Now we can go, said Batty. But Batty, your wings, said Rosalind. I told Jeffrey he'd borrow them. What did he say? Said Skye. He said thank you. Nothing else? Yes, he said goodbye for now. That's nice, said Jane. I like that. Hound, say goodbye for now, said Batty. Woof, said Hound. Then they were gone.